When facing death, one must take care that their body does not betray them. Before an overwhelming threat, the body will freeze. Weapons can slip from sweat-soaked palms, and uneven breathing causes focus to slacken. To become truly strong, mastery of the body must be achieved. Alvin was long past worrying about such things. As he slinked through the dark, his focus remained crystal clear and his heart steady. When he placed a hand on a crude column and peered around the corner, he left no residue. His body had long left behind such mortal needs as sweating or leaving scents. When he spotted a patrol, there was no point in holding his breath as he activated the space in between, and no longer existed in the same reality.
I'm Commoner, and these are my comments. Welcome to my first impression series where I take a tiny nibble out of a larger book off of RoyalRoad, and I tell you what I think. Today we're going to be looking at 3 chapters of Surviving the Myriad Worlds by Eternal Winter. The first thing any reader sees is going to be the cover. This one was commissioned by Eternal Winter on Upwork from Ahmad Karam. It's interesting. It gives a more color pencil-y feeling to it, or maybe graphite stick vibes. The color choices lead me to expect a dark fantasy kind of story, predominantly set in like a forest or maybe a very small town. Very naturey, natural vibes. The moon seems to be breaking in like a vine-like pattern, which makes me wonder if maybe the antagonist is using some kind of nature magic, maybe corrupted nature magic. They're breaking the moon, which often symbolizes purity or cycles or consistency, those kinds of things. Maybe the antagonist or the protagonist are challenging the cycle that is already going on, or maybe they're challenging nature itself, or maybe they're corrupting in some way, corrupting the world. A lot of good, interesting symbolism that definitely draws me and draws my eye. I like this piece of art in general. I will say, though, it is a bit hard to read at a distance. So when you pull up RoyalRoad, all of the titles, all of the covers are very small. If I'm scrolling through a list of books casually, I can't see most of those beautiful and intriguing details. I can't speculate about what the moon might be breaking apart as a consequence of. I can't see the 2 antagonist-protagonist figures very clearly. They're a little bit muddled. At a distance, it really looks like maybe a person being grasped by some kind of claw, or maybe a vampire or something at the bottom of the image, and then the top reads as like the vampire's form turning into bats to a man. From a quick glance at a small scale, it's very hard to read, and it doesn't have that like explosive grab or that excitement factor that tells somebody go click on that. As a piece of art, I really like this. I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot of little details in there that are interesting, and they let me dig into them and figure out what the symbolism is and why this choice was made over that choice. What's the little cabin in the background? Why are both of the characters facing the camera? Are they actually protagonist, antagonist, or are they actually together in some way? Are they on a journey and they're going to help each other out along the way? Are they parallel protagonists? Lots and lots of good questions if I can see the whole art as it is. For a RoyalRoad cover in particular, I think it misses the mark because it's not legible at a distance. It's really hard to see what is going on until you get in there and you click on it. Now, I'm by no means an expert on art or engagement or anything like that. So maybe people see it and they go, "Ooh, what's that? Let me click on it and find out. Maybe this is working to your benefit." Don't know, but that is something I would note. Is just it's not very legible at a distance, and that might, in turn, cause people not to click on it, not to notice it, because it's too abstract, too hard to read, too hard to understand what's going on. And therefore doesn't necessarily grab interest. It's just there. Now, second thing that a reader encounters is probably the blurb.
Dante's idea of an afterlife did not involve saving a world, never mind 9 of them. Ever thought that most isekai settings were so similar that they could be the same world? That it's a cop-out to have transmigrators speak the local tongue immediately? Wonder why all lit RPGs have an identify skill? Rest assured that you will find none of these things in the Myriad Worlds. Dante Embry has lived a complicated life, fraught with misfortune and encounters with the law. He's just gotten his lucky break through the efforts of his little sister and was beginning to get things together. Right as he was celebrating his triumph, he met an untimely end in an inferno. Fortunately for him, he was rescued by a mysterious, possibly divine, benefactor, and was thrust into a strange new world. Armed only with a frustratingly unhelpful system and unable to even understand the languages and customs of the natives, Dante must survive an ordeal that seems engineered to ensure his death. Travel with Dante as he struggles to survive in lands that defy all reason, fights monsters beyond mortal ken, and faces harsh dilemmas that test his moral fiber.
First off, Eternal Winter starts with a powerful first sentence, then immediately breaks the fourth wall. Then we go back to a more serious blurb. This essentially begins the process of immersion to a reader, then breaks it, then asks the reader to return to full immersion. So it's a bit of a whiplash for me. I would definitely prefer to have the tone remain consistent, at least most of the way through, so that I can get immersed, so that I can fully let myself get lost in the description. Personally, I dislike when a blurb addresses me. I have a strong preference for blurbs which are written in a similar style and with a similar rule set as the book that they're advertising. And I tend to just assume that the blurb is going for that. So I judge the blurb as part of the book almost. So I give it the benefit of the doubt that this is an example of what I can expect as far as quality of writing, as far as maintaining threads of thought and organization in general. That being said, plenty of blurbs do address the reader, and plenty of them are successful. So take my thoughts with a grain of salt. My advice would be that if you want to address the reader, pick one part of the blurb to put all of the fourth wall break into. My preference would be to put it at the end, so that people like me who don't really care for that style just get the first part, and then we see that fourth wall break, and I would just be out of the blurb. I'd be like, okay, I've read the blurb, now I'm gonna decide whether I want to read the book or not. Besides just my personal preference, this will also allow you to kind of yank the reader into immersion and deliver your hook. Like I said, you have a powerful first sentence. It's a shame not to use it. Then, if you want to have the additional parts addressed directly to the reader later, it's packaged more as like a, hey, I'm done with the formal blurb, and now we're going to talk more casually. So it's, this section is our official blurb. This section is kind of chill talk. We're just going to have as buddies. We enter the prologue following Alvin. We learn he's a powerful entity with at least a handful of strong abilities. Using these abilities, Alvin infiltrates what appears to be some kind of bastion of an enemy force. This chapter gives us an inkling into the abilities and magic system and how they work, which is always fun to get right off the bat. It gets us excited, it gets us hyped up for what's to come. Great. It also introduces us to the conflicts that are going on outside of what's going to happen to the main character later. So we are establishing stakes that are beyond the main character right away. That's great. There's some kind of war raging, and it's not new. We also get hints of betrayal, and in the last moments, greater calamities still, even larger than a war. So those are great. It's a good prologue. There's a lot of things prologues can be used for. An effective one, though, should introduce the reader into important concepts which the main character or characters may never become aware of themselves. Beyond that, the prologue is an opportunity for the author to showcase and grant the audience a glimpse into the wider world, which the main character will eventually get to. This allows the reader to build interest in what's going to happen down the line, down the road, without having to resort to a flashback or some other gimmicky approach, right? We are in the present, but we can see some things that are going to impact our main character down the road, and in so doing, illuminate the reader to what is going to happen or give them hints as to what's going to happen without telling them, without spoiling the story. And since it is all in the present, if something does happen to the main character, we don't necessarily know that they're going to come out of it okay, that they're going to be fine. The prologue here does both of those things. We're given a lot to ponder, and we can eagerly await how the main character is going to be tied into this story that is already been ongoing for a while. That's awesome. Chapter 1 and 2 introduce us to our main character, Dante. He's a bit rough around the edges, clearly has a history of anger management that he's currently trying to work through. He's trying to improve himself. The characterization is done well. Dante's actions and the way he interacts with people are what show us the kind of person he is and how others see him, which is awesome. We're not spending time explaining to the reader what's happening, rather we just show them. So absolutely fantastic job of that, Eternal Winter. Great job. Chapter 2 begins heating things up. Dante and his sister end up in a dangerous situation, leading to choices of morality, which then let us delve even further into the kind of person that Dante is, and as he has to make those moral choices. The author built Dante as a character with skeletons and painted him as less than a hero, but with a strong love and connection to his sister, a redeeming aspect. That being said, I'm curious to see how that translates as the story transitions to the other side of the isekai. I assume his sister can't come with him. The one thing I hit a snag on as I was reading, particularly in the prologue, but I also got caught a few times in the other chapters, was with continuity. Before I fully get into what I noticed here, I want to note that Eternal Winter already stated that they're going to be revising the chapters after the end of the write-a-thon, which is ended now. It took me a long time to get this recorded and done. A lot of what I'm going to go over here is most likely already on the list to be iterated on and improved after they have that time to go back and improve it. So if you hear anything that is like a deal breaker to you as a reader, just wait a couple months, probably the end of June-ish. They'll be done with their revisions, and then most of this will probably already be corrected or improved or iterated on. There are a few different distinct things I noticed as I was reading that broke my flow. First one was word choice, or trying to explain two different things which ended up clashing at the end. It's pretty common when writing pretty quickly. Pretty much every writer is going to do this at some point. For example, in chapter 1 we have a single sentence which illustrates the point pretty well.
It seemed that they had managed to board the bus just in time, as the pitter-patter of rain against the roof soon began right then.
Rain against the roof soon began, or rain against the roof began just then, are both entirely fine. But once you have both of them together, it's contradictory, which breaks that immersion and breaks the reader out of their flow, because they have to parse through and figure out, okay, something's wrong. What do you intend to say? Once you do parse it, it makes perfect sense. It's not really that confusing. It's just a moment that breaks a reader out of their reading flow. Beyond just simple word contradictions, there are a few areas where there are seemingly contradictions in character perceptions and motivations. So, for example, we have...
Alvin braced himself to use the space in between again. Usually, Alvin wouldn't dare to use it in such quick succession. However, he was in the middle of enemy territory and about to cross into the heart of their camp. The tidings he brought were critical enough to risk it. The Shadowlands returned, and Alvin darted through the gate to the outside. 2 paragraphs later, Alvin wasn't willing to risk retreating into that space for a good long while, so he relied on his mundane stealth skills to begin making his way over to the wall. Amongst these lower-level grunts, it was more than enough.
Those two things contradict each other. The first one says, this is critical, I have to be careful, but it's worth it. It's worth the risk that I'm taking right now, because there's a lot of danger here. I'm in the heart of the enemy camp. I can't risk it. I have to do this. And then there's almost a, whatever. They're all just low-level grunts anyway. I can just use my mundane skills. I can risk it all. That is jarring, because we have already stated how important and how critical this is, how much Alvin is willing to risk, and then we go back and say, oh, never mind. Never mind about that. Actually, they're all mundane, and I'm too good. So choosing and sticking with one of those narratives will clarify to the reader what the stakes are and how the character is feeling. Now, lastly, there are some continuity challenges with missing events or assumed events, which aren't as clear to a reader as they probably are to the author. none of them are so bad as to make it impossible to figure out what's going on, which is good. That would be difficult to get through. But it does break the reading flow and forces the reader to stop again and parse what's going on and try to figure it out. So for example,
Alvin braced himself to use the space in between again. Usually Alvin wouldn't dare to use it in such quick succession. However, he was in the middle of enemy territory and about to cross into the heart of their camp. The tidings he brought were critical enough to risk it. The Shadowlands returned, and Alvin darted through the gate to the outside. He found himself in the middle of a simple plaza, surrounded by simple cloth yurts. From their openings came the sound of the Varynian tongue, punctuated by growls and yips. In the far distance loomed a massive earthen wall, crested by enormous stones that formed a crude imitation of a parapet and krenos. Massive shapes in the distance, far dwarfing even the largest yurts, patrolled the walls. It was those that he needed to avoid above all. It was dangerous to linger here, so he used the space in between again and sprinted. He made it to the space between two yurts before it was too much and cancelled the ability. The whispers had grown loud enough that he had begun to understand them. The knowledge that he had learned, he would rather have not known such things.
Alvin uses his space in between ability, then he uses it again, but there's no indication he ever stopped using it in the first place. So it's a bit confusing at first as to why he's using it again, especially since we know this is a risky thing for him to use. Understanding when he starts and stops and the time between is important for us to readers to understand the stakes that are at play. It's a bit unclear as to what quick succession means in the context of reusing the ability. He's concerned about using it too soon after its previous use. But then he seems to use it twice in even quicker succession from a reading perspective over the course of another couple paragraphs. There's no sense of time between uses, or the sense of time between uses is fully in the word count, the words between paragraph A and paragraph B. There isn't a sense of how much distance is traveled. There's not a countdown of any kind, so we can't extrapolate from that. There aren't even common events that we might be able to connect with some form of time in order to determine what quick succession means. So maybe adding a little bit of that visual element of dashing a certain amount of meters or feet or something like that would give us a baseline. So we know if you run from point A to point B, that's probably going to take 30 seconds, 15, whatever it is. And then he uses it again and notes this was quick succession. Now I know quick succession is 15, 30-ish seconds. Got it. And then when you say quick succession later, I should be able to pick that up and understand what you mean. But without context, it's hard to understand it. Even something as simple as adding little hints that the consequences of the ability continue to get worse as he uses it will help a ton in a case like this. Even if you don't take the time to go and say 30 seconds is our quick succession. Even if you don't have a demonstration of what quick succession means, having those stakes demonstrated and the consequences demonstrated constantly and consistently will help demarcate that as well. So for example, the voices becoming more distinct and understandable could be used to great effect here. Maybe each time he activates the ability or just before he exits it, add a little line of what he hears, and that gives the impression to the reader of how closely he's cutting it. That aside, I really do enjoy the characterization of Dante and even Alvin for the short time that we have with him. Eternal Winter does a great job showing, not telling, allowing actions to speak for themselves and trusting the reader to read between the lines in terms of who the characters are and what their motivations are. Alvin is arrogant, self-important, dismissive of his enemy, and dedicated to whatever cause he is following. I get all of that without being told, and that is fantastic. The consequences he reaps at the end of the prologue read entirely as his own fault due to character flaws rather than being contrived as the plot called for it. That indicates that you're doing a great job building characters in the way that they drive the story rather than being driven by the story, which is fantastic to see. There are so many stories out there, professional, amateur, whatever, that just shoehorn It's just, insert character here. Doesn't really matter who the character is, the story would have drawn them along. And the way that you're characterizing so far leaves me with the impression that these characters and who they are is important in determining what happened during the story, which I love. We also have some good dialogue in both chapters 1 and 2. The interactions between Dante and the others feel mostly very natural. The natural interactions are dampened a bit by what I would consider an overuse of identifiers. At first, I thought my attention was being grabbed because of the use of bro and sis, which aren't commonly used in conversation anywhere I've personally been. However, on further thought, I realized that it was just an initial assumption on my part that was what broke me from my reading flow and caused me a little bit of that moment. Because it's not normal for me, I automatically identified that as the problem, so to speak. However, I disagree with my past self. I don't think that is what was actually tripping me up. I think that the overuse of identifiers in general is what caught me. Different people use different words to express themselves, whether it's cultural, regional, or something else. There's no problem with choosing words which aren't considered mainstream or normal, and I wouldn't even really have noticed the use of abnormal identifiers if my reading flow hadn't been broken, I don't think. So, identifying where those breaks happen and just tweaking that a bit, most likely by removing identifiers, should avoid similar feelings and feedback in the future. When people have been chatting with one another, it's unlikely that they're going to use an identifier at all. There's no real reason to constantly say your brother's name if the two of you are the only people who have a realistic reason to converse at all. So pulling back on the overuse of identifiers in general would go a long way, in my opinion. This includes using the abbreviated versions and full versions of the words too closely together. Bro is brother, sis is sister, and we'll kind of translate that automatically, even if the tone of bro is different versus brother. They are different, but for a pattern recognition in our minds, they're similar enough that it's going to trip. So if we see brother and then the next paragraph we see bro, it just that trips our pattern recognition, and we think that things are being overused, or we think that there is something repetitive here, and that's kind of just a subconscious impression. It isn't necessarily something we think about consciously. Keeping those things in mind, trying to reduce the same use of words and identifiers in general in a short period of time, especially without a particular reason, should avoid people feeling off about the identifiers. The other piece in particular to me is when Dante's being mushy. That feels like a really good opportunity to display intimacy. So since he's already calling Sophia sis casually, it's kind of difficult to feel the moment as strongly, beyond already having used the identifiers enough times that it's already triggered my pattern recognition and it now feels a little odd. It's also a moment of tonal shift, or expected tonal shift, that feels like it's missing, since we're just reusing words that have already been used in a casual setting. Now, what I would suggest, if Eternal Winter is looking to make some changes to Sophia and Dante's interactions, would just be a bit more varied and intentional with which identifier you're using, so that it doesn't feel overused, and so that you can choose the emotional impact. So consider choosing an address which is more intimate versus less to them, and then you can use that as a contrast when you want to change that tone. And that gives the reader a hint that something's a little different without having to call it out. Sis is already established as casual, so maybe Soph is more heartfelt, more intimate. Or you could even go the opposite. Soph, good to see you. Why are you all dressed up? You know, sis, I couldn't do this without you. Same thing. The tone can be obvious just by the word choice, just by the address. Having a intentional emotional attachment to a particular identifier will help the reader differentiate tone as well. Overall, I think that this is a strong start to an isekai focused more around the main character himself rather than just what happens to him. That's always a really good sign. There's plenty to enjoy here, from the mysteries of who Alvin was and how the prologue ties back to the main storyline, to looking forward to how Dante develops as a character without his sister providing an emotional anchor and reason to continue to better himself. Will he find something else? Will he look inside and find reasons without any external stimulus, without external push? Eternal Winter noted over DMs was they're going to be going back and revising the story, as I mentioned before. So again, if anything that I've mentioned here is off-putting, just wait till probably end of June or so. It's probably just going to be a whole new level. Come back after a few chapters and let me know if you agree with my first impressions or had different thoughts entirely. That's all I have for you today. As we part, remember, whether you're common or royal, act with nobility.